Hey, it's Brad. So, perspective is kind of fundamental to communication. Um, and by perspective, I mean really kind of the language of constructs that you use to get to a certain concept. Because really, all concepts that you have in your mind are from experience and then aggregated and distilled and stretched and squeezed. You re-examine to optimize and reapply patterns. Like image that I like is of old sitcom cop show where they take two maps and overlay them, and all of a sudden they know where the last attack is going to be. But that sort of thing, you have a pattern in your mind, and then you find a new pattern, and you realize there's a connection between them, and then you have that aha moment of, oh, these patterns are the same. I can reduce and simplify this and store it more easily. And some people think that's kind of a silly metric, kind of the neurological optimization. Well, first of all, that's kind of the natural state, the natural optimization of any sort of a flowing system. So that's beside the point. But even with this in particular, the more dense the context is, the bigger the context space feels in your moment, the less free memory you have, the less RAM you have to process on the content. So the more complex a concept is in your mind, the more difficult it is to hold it all in at once. And you really kind of have to, most people have an experience of being able to understand something that's, relatively complex in the moment. When they're following along, they can, listen and pay attention, and they can follow step by step. And even if they know the steps, they just have to follow those steps to kind of have the mental workbench set up correctly. And when things get complex enough, there's no real way to manage all of that at once if you haven't optimized things. And there are some spaces that are just too big to hold at once, and then you have to kind of parallelize and fold things over. But that's a whole different thing. As far as the optimization goes, that's how you understand things. That processing action is what defines your shortest path to a concept. When you think of a concept, these things that define it, the lookup, the address for it. Really, the perspective defines the context for understanding any translation, any expression of a concept that you put forward. It's like when you read a book written by someone, you're knowing nothing about the author, you take it in a certain context, and generally that's whatever your life is, because that's your default. You assume, well, this is written by a human, I'm a human, unless otherwise stated. I'm going to assume our experiences are rather similar, and they have to deal with cicadas too. If I find out they're in a different part of the world where they don't have those, good for them. They probably have some other stuff. But when you find out more about the author, like, what era they lived in, what their culture was like, then things that they say or images they use or even dynamics they refer to or imply are unlocked. It adds dimensions of depth to the subtext and all the text. But as far as the application of these perspectives, well, if you can understand your own, then you can understand how your words are biased. Inherently impossible, but just in the extreme. It's also inherently the goal to aim for. It's the ideal. If you can understand your perspective and another person's perspective, or more people's perspective in general, then you can understand how those two perspectives relate and you can communicate concepts. That's, again, kind of the nature of social existence. But understanding the perspective of things that are more complex, like things that you are optimizing and setting up to have those aha moments about, structures that you need to trust will be applicable and useful in the future. That's the basis of all education. So if you had like some basic addition, like teaching my son, he understands addition, so understood that half his life, and still getting the hang of multiplication. But when he saw how addition can become multiplication, I explained it a couple different times, a couple different ways, but then when it was laid out, on a grid, it was on the bottom of a basket I flipped over, it clicked for him, and you could, see him light up, and he's like, oh, I get it. And so then he was, doing a bunch of examples for me. But if I had, just brushed it off and left that to be learned later, and then, missed opportunity for everyone. And that pattern applies in teachings. Like I was saying about white lies, it's not even just that they're detrimental, it's that generally there's a missed opportunity for a better response. Like if kids ask, why is the sky blue? Well, you could just say, it's blue because it's blue, or I don't know, or stop talking, or whatever. And that's just dismissive and just going to shut down that train of thought. And good job, now your kid's not as inquisitive. But I prefer my kids to be smart, so I would rather indulge their curiosity when it's productive and beneficial and teach them something else. Like that's a good opportunity to go into like very basic nature of light. Get a brief overview of Rayleigh scattering. I've seen half a dozen different kids shows doing just that. Talking about pretty complex, I guess middle school science for toddlers. That's where I think we really need to just stop whitewashing and candy coating everything. We need to give them something dense that makes sense on every level, where it's something they need to unpack so they'll remember it, because it doesn't fully make sense right away, but it's useful right away, like a Swiss Army knife or a tool or something. But then as they understand it, kind of unlocks and levels up. And it's through that understanding and seeking those aha moments and learning and harnessing their creativity towards these productive and beneficial applications, and seeking to understand the truth, because the truth is never incomplete or partial or contradictory. It's just our understanding of it, and so we should try to fix that.